My wife demanded I babysit her sister's two minions every weekend so they could go clubbing. I refused. You know that moment when your spouse drops a bombshell on you that completely changes everything you thought you knew about your marriage? Well, buckle up, because what started as a simple request turned into the biggest fight of my life and exposed truths I never saw coming. My name is Marcus. I'm 32 years old, and I need to tell you about the weekend my wife demanded I become a free babysitter for her sister as kids while they went clubbing. This isn't just about babysitting, though. This is about respect, boundaries, and what happens when family takes advantage of you one too many times. Let me paint the picture for you so you understand exactly where I'm coming from here. My wife Sarah and I have been married for 6 years, and for the most part, we've had a solid relationship built on communication and mutual respect. Her younger sister Jessica is 28, married to a guy named Brandon, and they have 2 kids, a 5-year-old boy named Tyler and a 3-year-old girl named Emma. Now don't get me wrong. I love my niece and nephew. They're great kids when they're well behaved, but that's the key phrase right there, when they're well behaved. The problem is that Jessica and Brandon have what I can only describe as a very relaxed parenting style, which is a polite way of saying those kids run absolutely wild with 0 consequences. It all started on a Tuesday evening when Sarah came home from having coffee with Jessica. I was in the kitchen making dinner, some pasta with homemade marinara sauce, when she walked in with this weird expression on her face that I couldn't quite read. She set her purse down on the counter, poured herself a glass of wine, and then just came out with it, like it was the most reasonable request in the world. So, Jessica and Brandon want to start having date nights again, and they were wondering if we could watch Tyler and Emma every Saturday night. I stopped stirring the sauce and turned to look at her, waiting for the punchline, but her face was completely serious. Every Saturday night? I asked, emphasizing the word every, because surely I must have misheard her. Sarah nodded and took a sip of her wine, explaining that Jessica felt like they'd lost themselves as a couple since having kids, and they needed regular time to reconnect. They want to go dancing, hit up some clubs, feel young again, Sarah said, and I could already feel the annoyance building in my chest. I asked the obvious question, why every single Saturday? Why not once or twice a month, like normal people? And Sarah's response was that Jessica insisted they needed consistency to really make it work. The way she said it, with this guilty edge to her voice, told me she already knew this was a ridiculous ask. Here is the thing about Jessica and Brandon that you need to understand to get why this request made my blood boil. These two have always been the type of people who want all the fun parts of life without any of the responsibility. They had kids because everyone around them was having kids, not because they were actually ready to be parents. Every family gathering, every holiday, every birthday party, they're the ones showing up late, leaving early, and spending the entire time on their phones or complaining about how tired they are. Meanwhile, they're posting Instagram stories from bars and concerts at least 3 times a week, so forgive me if I do and buy the whole we never get time for ourselves narrative. I told Sarah right then and there that this wasn't going to work for me, that our Saturdays were our time too. We both work demanding jobs during the week, me as a project manager at a construction company and Sarah as a senior accountant, and weekends are sacred. Saturday's the one day we get to sleep in, go to the gym together, run errands without rushing, maybe catch a movie, or try that new restaurant we've been talking about. The idea of surrendering every single Saturday to babysit while Jessica and Brandon went clubbing felt like a slap in the face. Sarah's response was to get defensive immediately, saying I was being selfish and that family helps family, which is ironic coming from someone whose sister never helps anyone but herself. We went back and forth for about 20 minutes while the pasta water boiled over and the sauce started to burn. I pointed out that Jessica and Brandon could hire a babysitter like literally every other parent on the planet who wants date night. Sarah countered that babysitters are expensive, which I knew was coming, because God forbid Jessica and Brandon actually budget for their lifestyle choices. I asked Sarah why we should sacrifice our only free time so her sister could go party, and she hit me with the emotional manipulation, saying that I clearly didn't care about her family. That's when I knew this conversation was going off the rails, because now suddenly I'm the bad guy for not wanting to be unpaid childcare every single weekend. The argument ended with both of us angry and sleeping on opposite sides of the bed that night. But here's where things got really interesting. Sarah didn't drop it. Over the next few days, she kept bringing it up in different ways, trying to wear me down. It would just be for a few hours, she'd say, even though I knew club nights meant they wouldn't be back until 2 or 3 in the morning. The kids love you, she'd add, which was true, but also completely beside the point. She even tried the angle of we might want kids someday. This would be good practice, which made me want to scream, because taking care of someone else as undisciplined children is not the same as raising your own. By Friday, Sarah informed me that she'd already told Jessica we'd do it, starting that very Saturday. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She'd made a commitment on behalf of both of us without even waiting for me to agree. When I confronted her about this, she just shrugged and said she knew I'd come around eventually, and didn't want to disappoint her sister. That's when I realized this wasn't really about babysitting at all. This was about Sarah's inability to set boundaries with her family, specifically with Jessica, who had always been the golden child who got whatever she wanted. Growing up, Sarah had told me stories about how she always had to share her toys, give up her plans, and sacrifice her needs for Jessica's happiness. And here we were, decades later, still playing out that same dynamic. Saturday afternoon arrived, and so did Jessica and Brandon with their 2 little tornadoes in tow. They burst through our front door at 4 p.m., with the kids already hyped up on sugar and 0 instructions about bedtimes, dietary restrictions, or emergency contacts. Jessica was wearing a tight dress and heels, clearly ready for a night out, while Brandon had on an expensive button-down shirt that probably cost more than what they spend on a babysitter for a month. "You guys are lifesavers," Jessica gushed, giving Sarah a hug while completely ignoring me standing there with my arms crossed. She rattled off that they'd be back late and that the kids had already eaten chicken nuggets in the car, so we didn't need to worry about dinner. Before I could even open my mouth to protest or ask basic questions about bedtime routines, they were out the door and peeling out of our driveway like teenagers escaping curfew. Sarah looked at me nervously, clearly registering the fury on my face, but the kids were already tearing through our living room before we could have it out. Tyler immediately found the remote control and cranked our TV up to maximum volume, while Emma started pulling books off our shelves and throwing them on the floor. "Tyler, Emma, that's not how we behave in Uncle Marcus's house," Sarah said weakly. But they completely ignored her, because why would they listen when there are never any consequences at home? The next 6 hours were absolutely hellish, and I mean that with every fiber of my being. These kids destroyed our house in ways I didn't think were physically possible. Tyler spilled an entire cup of juice on our cream-colored couch because he insisted on doing parkour jumps while drinking. Emma found Sarah as makeup bag and decided to give herself and our white bathroom walls a makeover with a $50 lipstick. When I tried to implement the bedtime at 8 p.m. like normal kids their age should have, they both laughed in my face, and Tyler literally said, "You're not my dad. You can't tell me what to do." Sarah, to her credit, tried to wrangle them, but she had no idea what she was doing because she never actually spent extended time alone with them before. By 10 p.m., both kids were still running around screaming, riding our furniture like horses, and demanding snacks every 15 minutes. I tried everything, putting on a calm movie, offering quiet activities, even bribing them with promises of ice cream. If they just settled down, nothing worked. Sarah was near tears at this point, finally seeing what I'd been trying to tell her about these kids being completely out of control. The house looked like a tornado had hit it. There was food smashed into the carpet, toys everywhere, and somehow Emma had managed to break a picture frame that had been on a shelf 6 feet off the ground. I looked at Sarah and said very calmly, "This is never happening again." Midnight rolled around and the kids finally crashed, passing out on our couch in their clothes, because forget about getting them into pajamas or brushing their teeth. Sarah and I spent the next hour cleaning up the disaster zone that was formerly her living room, working in tense silence. I kept looking at the clock, watching 1 a.m. come and go, then 2 a.m., then 3 a.m., with no sign of Jessica and Brandon. At 3:30 in the morning, I heard a car door slam outside, and I looked out the window to see them stumbling up our walkway, clearly drunk, laughing and hanging all over each other. My blood pressure probably hit stroke levels as I yanked open the front door before they could even knock. Jessica took one look at the expression on my face, and her smile faltered a bit. But Brandon, who I've never liked, just grinned stupidly and said, "Hey, man, kids give you any trouble?" I stepped aside to let them see the destruction. The smashed crackers ground into the rug, the juice stains, the broken frame, the general chaos that their children had unleashed. Sarah came up behind me, and I could hear her sharp intake of breath, probably realizing how bad this looked now that her sister was standing there. Jessica had the audacity to laugh it off, saying, "Yeah, they can be a handful, like this was somehow cute or normal." She scooped up Tyler while Brandon grabbed Emma, and they headed for the door without even offering to help clean or apologizing for being 3.5 hours later than late should mean. As they reached the doorway, Jessica turned back and said, "Same time next Saturday?" with this expectant smile on her face. That's when I completely lost it. I told her in very clear terms that there would be no next Saturday, no future Saturdays, and that if she wanted to go clubbing every weekend, she could hire a professional babysitter like a responsible parent. The smile dropped off her face immediately, and she looked at Sarah like I'd just slapped her. "Sarah, are you going to let him talk to me like this?" Jessica demanded, and I could see my wife standing there torn between her sister and me, which honestly hurt more than anything else that had happened that night. Sarah surprised me, though. She actually stood her ground. She told Jessica that I was right, that this had been too much to ask, and that we had our own lives and couldn't be expected to give up every weekend. Jessica's face went red, and she started in on this tirade about family obligation and how she'd always been there for Sarah, which was categorically untrue based on every story I'd ever heard. Brandon finally chimed in, saying we were being selfish and that real family doesn't ask for payment or complain about helping out. I pointed out that real family also doesn't take advantage of people's kindness and treat their house like a demolition zone without even saying thank you. The argument escalated into a full-blown family drama right there in our doorway at 3:45 in the morning. Jessica started crying those manipulative tears that she's always been good at, claiming we were ruining her marriage by not supporting their need for connection. Sarah actually laughed at that, a harsh sound I'd never heard from her before, and said that maybe their marriage problems had more to do with their refusal to grow up than with lack of date nights. Jessica looked absolutely stricken, gathering her kids and her dignity, and stormed off to their car while hurling insults over her shoulder about how we regret this and how family remembers who is there for them. The next few days were incredibly tense in our house. Sarah's phone was blowing up with messages from her mom, who Jessica had apparently run crying to with a heavily edited version of events. According to Jessica's story, we'd agreed to help and then backed out last minute, leaving them stranded and making them feel like terrible parents. Sarah's mom was demanding we apologize and fulfill our commitment, not even bothering to hear our side. Sarah was caught in the middle, feeling guilty, but also finally seeing how her family had always weaponized guilt to get what they wanted from her. We had long conversations about boundaries, about how helping family is important, but not at the cost of our own well-being and relationship. I made it clear to Sarah that this was a hill I was willing to die on, not because I don't care about her family, but because I care about us more. Our marriage couldn't survive if we let other people dictate how we spent our time and treated our home. Sarah eventually came around completely, realizing that she'd been conditioned her whole life to put Jessica's needs first, and that pattern had to end. She called her mom and explained the real situation, the lack of respect, the destroyed house, the ungodly hour they returned, and how they'd never even said thank you. Her mom was silent for a long moment before admitting that Jessica had always been spoiled, and maybe it was time she faced some consequences. The following Saturday, Sarah and I slept in until 10 a.m., made a huge breakfast together, and spent the day doing exactly what we wanted. We went hiking at this state park we'd been meaning to visit, had lunch at a brewery, and came home to a clean house that stayed clean. It was absolutely glorious. Sarah kept checking her phone nervously, expecting angry messages from Jessica, but surprisingly, there was nothing. We later found out through the family grapevine that Jessica and Brandon had actually found a babysitter and paid for it like normal adults, and the world hadn't ended. Apparently, being forced to take responsibility for their own choices was actually good for them. Here is what I learned from this whole ordeal that I think applies to anyone dealing with difficult family dynamics. First, saying no doesn't make you the villain, even when people try to paint you that way. Setting boundaries is healthy and necessary, especially when someone is asking you to consistently sacrifice your own happiness for their convenience. Second, enablers don't help anyone in the long run. By always saying yes to Jessica's demands, Sarah's family had created a monster who expected the world to revolve around her needs. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let people experience the natural consequences of their choices. Third, your spouse should be your priority, not your extended family. I love that Sarah eventually chose our marriage and our peace over her sister's demands, because that's what commitment looks like. It's not always easy to stand up to family, especially when you've been trained your whole life to keep the peace, but it's necessary for a healthy relationship. Fourth, kids aren't accessories or excuses. They're human beings who deserve parents who actually want to parent them. Jessica and Brandon needed to understand that having children means your life changes, and you can't just pretend it did, and because you want to relive your 20s. The aftermath of all this was actually better than I expected. After a few weeks of silence, Jessica reached out to Sarah to apologize. She admitted that she'd been feeling overwhelmed and trapped by motherhood and had been taking it out on everyone around her. She and Brandon had started going to counseling and were working on being more present parents while also finding a healthy balance with a once-a-month date night using a regular babysitter. Sarah's relationship with her sister improved because for the first time, it was based on mutual respect rather than one-sided obligation. And our Saturdays remained ours, sacred and unscheduled. I am not going to lie and say everything is perfect now because family dynamics are complicated and take time to fully reshape. There are still moments when Sarah's mom makes comments about how we should help out more, or when Jessica hints about needing a favor. But we've gotten much better at setting clear boundaries and sticking to them without guilt. We've explained to the family that we're happy to help in emergencies or occasionally, but not as a regular unpaid service. We've also made it clear that when we do help, basic respect for our home and our time is non-negotiable. This experience taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in dysfunction. By standing my ground, I didn't just protect my marriage and my weekends. I actually helped Jessica and Brandon become better parents. They had to face the reality that they couldn't just pawn their kids off whenever they felt like it, and that forced them to find real solutions. Their kids have reportedly improved in behavior too, now that Jessica and Brandon are actually implementing consistent rules and consequences at home. Funny how that works when parents actually parent. Looking back, I don't regret a single moment of that argument or how I handled it. Could I have been more diplomatic initially? Maybe. Could I have sat Sarah down earlier to discuss my concerns before it reached crisis level? Probably. But at the end of the day, I protected what mattered most: my marriage, my home, and my sanity. I refused to apologize for having boundaries or for expecting basic respect from the people who claim to love us. And honestly, I think Sarah respects me more now for standing firm rather than just going along to keep the peace. So if you're in a situation where family is taking advantage of you, where you're being guilted into sacrificing your own well-being for someone else's convenience, I want you to know that it's okay to say no. It's okay to prioritize your immediate family, your spouse, your kids if you have them, over extended family demands. It's okay to expect reciprocity and respect in your relationships. And it's definitely okay to refuse to babysit your wife's sister's kids every weekend so they can go clubbing. That's not being selfish. That's being sane. The best part of this whole story is that Sarah and I are closer now than we've ever been. We've been through a serious test of our partnership and came out stronger on the other side. We've learned to communicate better about family expectations and to present a united front when dealing with unreasonable requests. We've also learned that our time together is valuable and worth protecting fiercely. Every Saturday morning when we wake up in our clean, quiet house and get to decide exactly how we want to spend our day, I'm reminded that standing up for ourselves was absolutely the right call. If there's one message I want you to take away from my story, it's this: your peace matters, your time matters, and your boundaries matter. Don't let anyone, not even family, convince you otherwise. The people who truly love you will respect your limits, and the ones who don't aren't worth the stress. Life is too short to spend every weekend cleaning up other people's messes, both literally and figuratively. Stand your ground, protect your peace, and don't ever feel guilty for refusing to be taken advantage of. Trust me, your future self will thank you for it, and your relationships will be healthier because of it.